Good morning, student. Today we will discuss about biomechanics and sports. Biomechanic. Biomechanic, it is a combination of two words, bio and mechanic. Bio means living things and mechanic, it is a field of physics. So biomechanic, it is a branch of science that deal with force and its effect on human body. Biomechanics give us knowledge about human body movement and the force that act on human movement. Biomechanics helps to understand various principles of physics like law of motion, equilibrium, lever, center of gravity, etc. Importance of biomechanics. What are the importance of biomechanics and sports? Understanding human movement. The principles of biomechanics give us knowledge about various human movement, knowledge about force on body. It gives us knowledge about various force acting upon human body. Okay, biomechanics. The knowledge of biomechanics give us knowledge about the various force that act on human body. Efficient movement. With the help of biomechanics, we can correct our movement. Okay, therefore we can correct our movement and helps to develop good skill. Correct movement. Biomechanic principles helps to find out the fault movement. Okay, with the help of biomechanic we can find out the mistake in our movement and we can correct it. Prevent injury. Biomechanic principles helps to prevent the injury. We can prevent the injury by making our movement correct, by applying correct force on human body, etc. Improve performance. Biomechanics helps to improve performance by developing good technique. With the help of biomechanics, we can develop good technique. We can develop new training methods through which we can improve our performance. Knowledge about physics principles. Biomechanics give us knowledge about various physics principles in relations with human movement like principles and law of motions, levers, types in body, equilibrium, etc. This type of physics principles guide safety principles. This subject guide us the safety principles and prevent injury. High helps in research work. Biomechanic principles also help in doing various research, help in developing new tools. With the help of biomechanic principles, we can develop new equipment, new tools. In sports, we can modify it. These are the some importance of biomechanic in sports. Okay, biomechanic means the study of force and its effect on our human body. With the help of biomechanics, we get a knowledge about human movement. We get a knowledge about force acting on human body. We can modify our movement, improve performance, correct our mistake. With the help of biomechanics, we can correct our mistake, and by correcting our mistake we can prevent injury. We can develop new technique, new training methods, helps in doing research work, developing new equipment, etc. Type of movement. Flexion. Flexions, it is the bending movement that decrease the angle between segment and its proximal segment. That is means flexions means when the angles between the joint decrease. For example, bending the elbow. etc. Okay, flexions means when the angles between the joint decrease. For example, bending the elbow. When you sit down, the knee are flexed. The angles in the knee is decreased. Extension is opposite of flexions. Extensions means when the angles between the joint increase. For example, strengthening the elbow, standing up. When you stand up, the angles in your knee increase, etc. Abductions means movement away from midline of the body, and adduction means movement towards the midline of the body. Like, look here, this is the flexions. Flexions means when the angles between the joint decrease. Here the angles decrease. And the extensions means when the angle between the joint decrease. For example, strengthening your hand, the angles here increase. Abduction means movement away from midline of the body. This is midline, and the movement away from midline of the body is known as abductions. For example, raising your hand up. Okay, for example, raising your arms up. And adductions is movement towards the midline of the body. This is midline. Okay, this is midline, and the movement towards the midline of the body. For example, lowering down your arm, etc. Next is elevations. It is the movement in superior directions. For example, shrugging your shoulder up. Depression, it is the opposite of elevation, that is movement in inferior directions. Like here, this is elevations, movement in superior directions. Depressions, it is movement in inferior direction. Next is rotation, internal rotations and external rotations. Internal rotations means rotations away from axis of the body. External rotations means rotations away from center of the body. Okay, internal means inside, rotation toward the axis of the body, and external means rotations away from center of the body, like neck side to side turning. Okay, internal rotations means inside, okay, towards the midline, and external rotations means outside, away from center of the body, like turning sideward, turning your neck sideward, etc. Circumduction, it is a conical movement of body part. For examples, in ball and socket joint or eye. In circumduction, it is a combinations of abductions, adductions, flexions, extension, etc. For examples, during bowling, okay, when you bowling, okay, when you throw a cricket ball in your ball and socket joint, the circumduction take place. Circumduction occurs when a cricketer throw a ball. Next is pronation. Pronations, it is a anatomical positions. The forearm, in this, the forearm is rotated so that the palm, okay, the palm of the hand is face backward, okay, face downward. Your face is also downward, means lie down on tummy. Okay, pronations means lie down on the tummy and your palm face downward. Supination. Supination means lying down on the back and your palms should be face upward. Your face should be upward direction. Flexion. Flexion, it is bending movement. Flexion, it is the bending of joint when the angle between the joint decrease. Extensions, when the angle between the joint increase. Abductions. Abductions means movement away from midline of the body. Adductions means movement towards the midline of the body. Circumductions means circular movement. Rotations. Internal rotation means rotation toward the axis of the body. External rotation means rotation away from the axis of the body. For example, rotating your neck side. Pronations means lie down on your tummy, your face downward and your palm is downward, turning down. Supinations means lying down on your back, your face and palm is facing upward direction. Inversion. Inversion means it is turning inward of the plantar aspect of the foot. Okay, inversion. And eversion, it is the opposite. Okay, this is inversion and eversion, this is eversion. Okay, inversion means turning inward of the plantar aspect of the foot. Okay, turning inward. And eversion means turning outward. Dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion means pulling the ankles. Okay, it is a movement of ankle which pull the toe and foot up towards the body. Dorsiflexions, your toes is towards the body. Okay, dorsiflexions and plantar flexions, it is the opposite of dorsiflexions. Okay, your toe and foot away from the body. Okay, dorsiflexion, this is plantar flexions, your toe and foot away from body. Proline positions. Proline positions means lying down on tummy and supine positions means lying down on your back. Next is law of motion and its applications in sports. Law of motion. The law of motion, were formulated by Isaac Newton in 1687. He explained and investigated that every motion is under the impact of these three laws: law of inertia, law of accelerations, and law of actions and reaction. These are the three laws of motions, and every motion, these are the three laws of motions according to Isaac Newton. First law of motion, that is law of inertia. According to first law of motion, an object at rest will remain at rest, or an object in motions will remain in motion unless an external force acts upon it. For examples, a football placed at a penalty point will remain at a fixed point unless a player kick the ball. Okay, a football placed at a penalty point will remain at rest unless a player kick the ball, and if a ball is in motions, then the ball will continuously remain in motions unless an external force act on it. Okay, An object at rest will remain at rest. An object in motions remain in motion at constant velocity unless acted upon by a force. If the object is motion, it will remain in motions, and if it is rest, it will remain in rest unless a force act on it. Second law of motion, that is law of accelerations. According to second law of motions, the rate of change in velocity of an object is directly proportional to the force applied and inversely proportional to the mass of the body. For example, if two unequal forces are apply on the object of equal mass, then where you apply more force, there will be the more velocity. The greater the force applied will cause more acceleration. For example, in shot put, a player who use more force, there will be the more accelerations, there will be the more velocity. Okay, if a shot put players who exert more force, there will be the more displacement. And in second law of motions, there is 2 points. First point is the rate of the change in velocity of an object is directly proportional to the force. If you apply more force, there will be the more acceleration. And second point is it is inversely proportional to the mass of the body. Okay, for examples, if equal force are applied to the object of unequal mass, then the object which has greater mass will have less accelerations. For examples, there is two objects. One object is 10 kg and second is 20 kg, and you apply same force, then the object which has greater mass, there will be the less displacement as compared to the object which is less weight. And third law of motions, that is law of actions and reactions. According to third law of motions, for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. For example, in swimming, if a swimmer pushes the water back, in return the water will push the swimmer forward. Or in athlete, if the athlete pushes the starting block backward, then in return the athlete is pushed forward. Okay, if he pushes the starting block backward, then in return the starter block will push the athlete forward. Okay, for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. These are the three laws of motions given by Isaac Newton. First law of motions. According to first law of motion, an object at rest will remain at rest, an object in motions will remain in motions unless and until unless a force act upon it. For examples, if a ball is in motions, it will remain in motion, and if a ball is at rest, it will remain at rest until a player kick the ball. Second law of motions. According to second law, the rate of change in velocity, that is displacement, of an object is directly proportional to the force and inversely proportional to the mass of the body. For examples, if you apply equal force to the object of equal mass, then the greater force will cause more accelerations. Okay, for example, if a shot put players use more force, then there will be the more acceleration. If in a shot put, a player who use more force, there will be the greater displacement as compared to the player who use less force. And according to third law, for every action there is equal and opposite reactions. In swimming, if a swimmer pushes the water backward, then in return the waters will push him forward. These are the three laws of motion. Next is friction. Friction, it is resistant to forward motion. Okay, friction, it is resistance to forward motion. It is the friction, it is the opposite force that come into play when one object move over the surface of other object. Friction, it always act in a opposite direction. Friction is created whenever the two surfaces move or try to move across each others, and it opposes the motion of the object. Okay, friction, it is the opposite force. It is the opposite force when two objects move over each other. Whenever the two surfaces move or try to move over each other, and it always act in opposite directions. For example, if you push the book, if you push the book forward, the book will move as the book will move, and it will slow down and stop after some time. The force that opposes the motion of an object is called friction. Okay, for example, if you push the book forward, then after some time the book will stop. Why? Because some force oppose the motion. That force is known as friction. Okay, friction, it is the force developed at the surface of contact of two bodies and oppose their relative motion. Friction, it is of two types, static and dynamic. Static friction, it is the opposite force that come into play when one body tend to move over other body, but the actual movement is not yet start. Okay, static means fixed, no movement. So in static frictions, it is the opposite force that come into play when one object move over the other object, but there is no movement. Okay, but the movement does not start. And second is dynamic. Dynamic means motion. So dynamic, it is the opposite force between the two surfaces that come into play when one body move over the surface of other. Okay, dynamic means motion. So in dynamic frictions, it is the opposite force that come into play when one body move over the surface of another body. Dynamic friction, it is of two types, sliding frictions and rolling friction. Sliding frictions, it is the opposite force. Sliding friction, it is the opposite force that come into play when one object slide over the surface of other object. Okay, when one object slide over the surface of other object, then for sliding frictions is weaker than static friction. Rolling friction, rolling frictions, it is a opposite force. Okay, rolling frictions, it is the opposite force when one object roll over the surface of other object. For example, cycling. Okay, for example, cycling, the cycle roll over the surface, over the road. Okay, rolling frictions. Rolling frictions means when an object roll over the surface of other object, and it is the rolling frictions slow down the motion of a rolling object. For example, this is the surface and the object roll over the others. This is a rolling frictions, and the force is created when the object roll over the surface of other object. And rolling frictions, it is much weaker than the sliding friction. These are the two types of friction. First, static frictions, dynamic frictions, and in dynamic there are two types, sliding frictions and rolling frictions. So this is about the frictions. Frictions means the opposite force that come into play when one object move over the other object. Okay, whenever two surface move or try to move over each other's, a force is created. That force is known as friction. Friction, it is of two types, static and dynamic. Static means fixed, so static frictions, it is the opposite force that come into play when one object move over the other object, but the movement is not started. Okay, but there is no movement. And dynamic frictions, it is also known as kinetic frictions. Dynamic frictions means it is the opposite force. It is the opposite force between two objects when it is the opposite force between two objects when one object come into contact over the other object and there is a motion. Sliding frictions means the opposite force. Okay, sliding frictions, it is the opposite force that come into play when one object slide over the surface of other object. For example, if you push the book, then the book after some time it will stop. Why? Because a force is created which stop the book. That force is known as friction. Rolling frictions, it is the opposite force that come into play when the object roll over the surface of other object. Rolling frictions slow down the motion of a rolling object. Okay, rolling frictions, it is created whenever a rolling object roll over the surface of other object. Advantage and disadvantage of friction. Helps to move. Frictions helps in movement. If there is no movement, if there is no friction, then the movement is not possible. Due to frictions there is movement. Frictions force helps to move the directions. For example, if there is no friction, then both objects will move, but due to opposite force, okay, the movement is possible. Stop the moving object. Frictions helps to stop the moving object. Okay, friction, it always act in a opposite directions, so it's help to stop the object. Frictions help to stop the moving object. Hold or grip an object. Frictions help to grip the object. Make movement difficult. Frictions make the movement difficult because we have to use more energy to make the movement. Okay, anytime you want to move an object, frictions can make the job more difficult. If there is more frictions, then more energy is required to do the movement. Waste of energy. Excess frictions means extra energy. If there is more frictions, then you require more energy. Produce heat. Frictions frictions the law conservations of energy state that the amount of energy remain constant. Thus the energy that is lost due to frictions is trying to move an object is really turned into heat. Okay, frictions, it's produce the heat. Wear and tear of object. Due to frictions there is wear and tear of object because lubrications is used to allow the part to move edges. Okay, because the frictions oppose the motion, therefore the chance of wear and tearing of object. Keep the object at positions. Frictions, it's help to keep the object at its fixed position. What are the role of frictions in sports? In sports, frictions it is important in sports. Friction, it is important force in every sports activity. Frictions, the movement required frictional force. Okay, locomotions required frictional force. Therefore the shoes we wear, especially in football, hockey, cricket, etc., are specially designed. Okay, are specially designed according to the requirement. Frictions, it also required for pulling and pushing the object. Frictions is required for making the grip, for example in badminton, hockey, etc. It is required to make a good gripping, for example in cricket also. These are the role of frictions. Okay, frictions, it is also important in sports to make the movement to reduce the injury, to improve the performance, etc. This is about our chapter biomechanics and sports. Biomechanics, it is a combination of two words, bio and mechanics. Bio means biology, study of living things, and mechanic, it is a field of physics. So biomechanics, it is a study of force and its effect on living things. Types of movement, there are various type of movement like flexion, extensions, abductions, adductions. Flexions means when the angle between the joint decrease, for example bending your elbow. Extension means when the angle between the joint increase, for example strengthening your arm. Abduction means movement towards abduction means movement away from midline of the body, for example raising your arm up. Adduction means movement towards the midline of the body, for examples dropping the arms. Okay, dropping the arms downward. Elevations means movement in superior directions. Depressions means movement in inferior directions. External rotations means rotations away from center of body. Internal rotations mean rotation towards the axis of body. Supine position means lying down on your back. Your face and palm is facing upward directions. Proline position means Lying down on your tummy, your face and your palms should face downward. Law of motions, there are three law of motions: law of inertia, law of accelerations, and law of action and reactions. And last, friction. And suppose friction, it is a resistance to forward motion. Okay, friction, it is a resistance to forward motion. It is the opposite force which is created whenever one object move over the surface of other object. Frictions, it always act in the opposite directions. It oppose the motion